This is Talking Hardcore, the podcast for people who love hardcore history.
We can skip the boring to the interesting stuff. Worst person in the world in history, Genghis Khan.
This is Talking Hardcore, episode 15. We recorded this about a week ago with writer and evolutionary psychologist Paula Wright. We did it via Zoom, Riverside. And there's a little bit of technical difficulties we had. There are a few edits we don't usually make, and we had to change where we were filming in the middle of the episode. So if you're actually watching this instead of listening, it might be a bit of a jump, because at one point we're in the basement, and then all of a sudden we're upstairs at my dining room table. Other than that, I think it went pretty well, and Paula is a fascinating person to talk to, and I hope you enjoy.
By the way, Paula, I'm George. I'm Scott. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
No worries.
So, you're an evolutionary psychologist, correct?
Yeah, mostly self-taught, yes. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. That's awesome. I think you're going to see a lot more of that kind of thing now. With the way the internet works, you can self-teach yourself a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing it for 20 years. Well, let me think. Since 2000 and... When did I graduate from my undergrad degree? I had a baby in 2003, and I knew that I wanted to go on and do evolutionary psychology, but I just had a baby. So, yeah, I kind of just studied and got in touch with evolutionary psychologists and collaborated with them. And obviously I've been accepted into the community over that time. And I've done some courses and what have you and things like that. But yeah, I've published in, in pretty much, some the formal, places that they publish in as well. And have referees from, David Buss is my referee, and Catherine Salmon. So yeah, I am a evolutionary psychologist. Cool. Yes, but I'm not actually in any academic institution at the minute. So I'm not actually doing research. I'm just kind of applying what I've learned to kind of the culture war.
Sure. Yeah, and we've both read a lot of your writing, and I find the ideas that you write about very interesting. And one of the things the reason we wanted to have you on is to talk about how some of what you've studied and what you know about evolution and human psychology and to history, to our knowledge and understanding of history.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, yeah,
is there anywhere?
Psychology.
Mm-hmm.
No, carry on. Sorry.
Yeah. No. Yeah, you're right. Evolutionary psychology. You were saying basically it's.
Well, it's the study of ancient human history. Yeah, absolutely. It's our history as a species.
Right.
Go ahead, George. I don't know what to say at this point.
Well, so one of the things that you talk about a lot is intragender competition, and the one you focus on most is female competition, intragender female competition. Do you have any ideas of how do you think that's helped shape human history?
Again.
So basically, we wanted to hear your thoughts about how intragender competition between women has shaped human history.
Okay. Now, it's interesting you call it intragender competition, because obviously it's called intrasexual competition in the literature. And I'm actually working on something called intragender competition at the minute, defining that as the competition between women and trans women, because that is a gender issue, not a sex issue. And it's a very novel, certainly, situation we find ourselves in. So yeah, I'm kind of putting it out there that I'm calling kind of the competition that we're seeing between women and trans women as intragender competition. It's certainly just based in gender. It's not based in sex, because obviously humans can't change sex. They can only change their gender. But intersexual competition, how it shapes the human species. Wow, that's a really deep question. And I'm not, well, I mean, as I kind of, there's one of my essays called Sexy Isn't Sexist. And it kind of
Yeah.
outlines in there that, the competition between the sexes is, pales into comparison in comparison to competition within the sexes. And probably, male intrasexual competition shapes the world, just as much. But what comes from all of them, I've kind of said in the past that, when it comes to the differences between the sexes, we kind of differ very little, really, in terms of natural selection. But when it comes to sexual selection, which is, the other side of Darwin's theory of natural selection, that's where
Right.
the changes become much more manifest, because as sex evolved, the fusing of two gametes rather than, just females reproducing, from themselves, like bees and things like that. And sex evolved itself in some way to kind of like to guard against pathogens and bacteria. And what comes from these things, I don't know. I can't. What we see, well, basically, it is what we see. We see hierarchies everywhere. Um, I'm not really.
Well,
I'm not really. Sorry, carry on.
so what I feel like you're right. Intrasexual competition between men is something we study a lot in history,
Yeah,
right?
there are, there are vast
Politics.
documentaries on, male intersexual competition from,
We just consider it history, right? And
yes,
so,
and female
and then
intersexual competition kind of constitutes maybe these days, a shelf in that library.
right.
And that's not because of
And
sexism. That's because female intersexual competition is much more covert and harder to see.
can you explain that?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's laid out in. I mean, my mentor was Anne Campbell, and she was one of the pioneers studying female intersexual competition at Durham University. She died, unfortunately, a few years ago, just when she was just as she was about to retire. But she wrote one of the first books on intersexual competition, called A Mind of Her Own. At the time, she was a feminist, but just before she died, she would email me from Durham University and say there's this kind of thing, because Durham University is now like kind of one of the woke central kind of places in England. And she kind of say, oh, the feminists have this meeting about toxic masculinity. I can't go. Can you go instead? And she kind of like wrote me in to kind of go and do it instead. But and I just go there and kind of listen, just to cut the kind of nonsense that was going on. But
Right.
So as far, there's Anne, and then after that there's she's not an evolutionary psychologist, she's a developmental psychologist, which is Joyce Benenson, and she's in Harvard at the minute. She doesn't take any research students, but she's looked at the strategies of competition and cooperation in children, in young children, both male and female, from infancy on, and documented those kinds of changes, whereas Anne specifically looked at as an evolutionary psychologist, looked at the evolutionary mechanisms, and went deep into also the biology of that, whereas Anne looks at not so much the mechanisms, but just the way it kind of presents itself out there. And then we have people like Tanya Reynolds, and Marianne Fisher, who has helped me in the past as well. I've co-authored with her. So it's,
but what is the difference though between the intersexual competition between women and men? Like, I know I read your articles, and that gave me a lot to think about on that. So
Mhm.
if you could just a quick like breakdown of how they're different.
Okay, well, the most startling, so right before we cut off again, the most empirical kind of thing to me that we see extant in culture today is that we build vast stadiums to male intersexual competition, which basically we see in sports stadiums where men go out and compete healthily against one another within sport, and wrestling rings and all of these kinds of things. Those things have never existed. There's never been, it made what I think the last Wonder Woman film made was really funny because it begins with in this kind of stadium where there's a massive kind of competition between women, and it's like, well, what are they competing for? Men are competing to be the best man, to be chosen by women, and in this kind of stadium, they're like, there is no men, and it's and I don't know how it kind of works. It's just in that kind of culture, it just doesn't make any kind of logical evolutionary sense. But yeah, so there are massive stadiums in every culture, and in war and bravery and male kind of prowess. Both, that they in young men, the warrior was.
The reason the way I understand it, one of the main motivators for men throughout history to try to be successful, to be in charge, to win the wars would be to have access to the best mates. That's how sexual selection works, right?
That's how male competition.
Yeah.
There are different facets of sexual selection, obviously, because there's female choice. But yeah, I think male competition is probably a bit stronger in our evolutionary history than female choice. And certainly men wage wars, not just defend territory in order for the main resource, which is female eggs.
Right. Yeah. Well, one thing that I like to bring up is I remember reading a study that, like on modern dating apps, 90% of women are attracted to 10% of males. So it's really, you have the 10% of men are dating the majority on the dating websites of the 90%.
Yeah.
So they're
I'm a bit leery of data from dating apps because they're measuring, and I've spoken to David Buss about this, and he kind of agrees. They're measuring single people who aren't already coupled.
So that makes sense. It's a skewed sample.
Yeah, and or people who've gone through one relationship and just from my personal experience, just been on public transport, a lot of 15-year-olds are pretending to be young men talking to I don't know, middle-aged women.
Imagine that technology
Yeah,
when you were 15, right?
yeah,
You would have been
yeah.
on there messaging
Oh,
single word, every single one.
Thanks, George.
Sometimes I love getting on a bus or a train and just listening to what's going on. And obviously, I've sat behind a bunch of like 15-year-old boys, and they've been totally trolling like women on Hinge.
I can imagine. That's a neat thing about public transportation is you can see that. Yeah, we don't have that much over here where we're at. So, but so the way women compete with each other is different because the pressures on them to work together were not as strong as they were on men. That's the way I understood it?
Well, like, they have to work together, but it's not in a meritocracy. I can't say the word, but it's not in a meritocracy. What I think our species is one which kind of when a woman marries, she moves out of her natal area into her partner's area. This is historical. Okay, generally most societies kind of have done this rather than males coming into the maternal kind of thing, and she begins status wise from zero again, right? Unless she's a queen or unless she comes with a certain status, and she has to ingratiate herself on this family. And I mean the even today, in so-called kind of harsh patriarchies, the behavior of mother-in-laws to daughter-in-laws is absolutely hideous. They're little more than slaves. Do you know what I mean? They get beaten and things like that. It's really, really quite horrific. And female, genital mutilation is perpetuated by women on women in order to get the best mate. And I think these are all ecologically kind of driven customs, and they do change, once ecological stresses lessen as well. But in societies where those ecological stresses are still really quite intense, like in poor countries and developing countries, it's they're still needed for a woman to actually ascend a hierarchy, which means kind of marrying into a good family. There's still kind of things like dowry in those kind of places as well. But in some places there's bride price as well, depending on whatever the sex ratio is going to be.
Right. That all that affects them.
Yeah.
Then that would be intersexual if you had and just to expand on the point. So it is, if you take, if a man marries a woman and then she has to ingratiate herself into, a household that's established, like the interaction between the mother-in-law and the new daughter-in-law. I mean, that's purely hierarchical, or is that like establishing who's going to control or who's going to influence the household or the family?
Well, it's evolutionary and it's hierarchical, and it's probably not conscious. But I mean, even in the West, there are tensions between mothers-in-laws and daughters-in-laws, and I think
you haven't experienced any of that. No, me neither. Nope, none.
So they don't disappear,
Yeah.
But I mean, there's always usually the daughter-in-law has to really kind of scramble for something, and she probably has to scramble to her partner to say, please back me up in these situations because I have nobody else to do that for me.
That definitely happens.
And if it doesn't, then it's pretty awful for her emotionally.
I would imagine.
Yeah.
I would imagine. The human history has kind of taken this evolution towards the society we have now, and you can kind of see the effects of male competition getting us to that point, getting us to where we have this representative democracy or representative republic, and where we try to limit the power of one man to do all to be Genghis Khan and have 1/10 of the population of Asia be his descendant. So it seems like that is something that we've tried to stem the bad influence of male intersexual competition. Do we do anything to kind of stem
which is really what sport does.
Exactly. Yeah. Do we do anything to kind of stem the bad influences of female intersexual competition?
We've never been there before. We are now.
Right. And this is kind of like what we're dealing with a lot now.
There have been very powerful women. I mean, I've just finished a book called, I've finished lots of books. I've been reading lots of serious books, but this one was just I saw it on the shelf when I was a kid in the house, and I thought, oh, I've never read that. I'll read it. But it's called Lorna Doone, A Romance of Exmoor. And one of the things in that is that the protagonist, the male, patriarch, kind of makes a point, which I thought was really interesting, where he said, nobody really comes to me for ideas, but they come to me to enforce ideas once they've decided upon them. And I think that's never written in history, the annals of history and that kind of thing. But this is the kind of thing that women are very powerful in, and it comes from the adage of the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. It's just because they're not, it's not in the books doesn't mean that it doesn't exist.
That's something I always like to point out. I think that this idea that men have been always the ones that have been shaping history, and that women have never had a say or anything like that. Like,
before they
feel like
have a say.
that's what I think.
Then
we didn't
you know,
talk about it. Yeah, we don't acknowledge it. But like you said, they
yeah,
raise they do the majority of the raising of the generations throughout history that led us to where we're at.
I think that's incorrect because because there's always the trope of like the woman with the rolling pin waiting to bash her head, henpeck her husband or bash him over the head with the rolling pin.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not like those things didn't exist. You
Right.
always had
Right.
strong women. I mean, what's that saying?
you don't have to use rolling
behind
pin.
every yeah, rolling pin, whatever you want to say.
Smack them upside the head, whatever.
Charm. You can use charm. There are different ways.
Yeah.
There are different ways to manipulate people. Men. There are positive ways and negative ways. So
Right.
Well, I'm just
no, but that's a great point.
I'm saying the trope's always been there.
Right.
I mean, we all grew up with like the hot headed Irish woman, taking control of her husband or bossing him around or something. Like maybe not Irish. I'm just saying that was just one of.
No. I've just been to Ireland. It's true.
That's awesome. Yeah. So this modern idea that it's always been men dominating and that women weren't allowed to participate. It doesn't seem like that is, if you take a holistic view, is accurate. Like they were participating. It was just everything wasn't so condensed and focused. They were participating generationally is one thing, like you said. They were raising the next generation, and that helps shape their beliefs. It helps shape the next generation, what they're going to be.
Well, no, I mean, they're not just shaping the children; they're shaping the men that they're with.
Right.
And
for sure.
If you're married to a pig, that's gender neutral or sex neutral. You can be.
Mm-hmm.
But like attracts like, I don't know. But I just think the idea that women, the feminist idea that women are invisible, to history in power relations and things like that, or even evolutionary ways, is a fallacy. It's a complete fallacy. They just don't know where to look for it, basically, and because they want women. Feminists want women, basically. The penis envy of feminists is off the charts. They want women to look like men, but they don't. And because they don't, they just refuse to look where they should be looking.
That's a great point. I think you're right.
And just off the top of my head, I could name 2 or 3 women, like Cleopatra, definitely a strong leader.
But I'm just saying. Point is, though, it's not just those, right? It's like what Paul thinks. It's
kind of exceptions to that make the rule. Those kinds of women,
right?
Like when they find a female warrior in a grave or a Neolithic grave, something like that. You've seen Game of Thrones, haven't you? Intersex people have existed. Since sexual. So they're those kinds of women. Probably they're those kinds of women. I have a kind of like a pet hypothesis that Joan of Arc was probably intersex, but I've got no way of proving it. But that's kind of that's just what.
That whole thing is, so what you're saying, though, I think this makes sense, is that the feminists are focusing on the way traditional men interact with history and not seeing the women. Their role, and I think that's accurate.
Feminism isn't looking for truth or enlightenment. It's just a revenge project. They're just looking to wrest power. Right. They wouldn't know what to do with it because all they do with it is put women in positions of power that men have traditionally been in, but women actually don't benefit from being in those roles.
And does society benefit then?
No. Not particularly. I mean, if a great woman rises to those positions of her own merit, absolutely.
If it's a meritocracy, then you're right. Like you got Margaret Thatcher or something like that.
Just doesn't add anything to that. It's tumbled down into kind of mediocrity. not
I think you're
meritocracy.
right, and I think it actually lessens the position. So, or yeah,
Yes.
It does the opposite effect, right? It does the opposite effect instead of helping gender relations or sexual
Yeah.
relations, or instead of helping the cause for women, it hurts the cause.
Yeah.
The
It
way
really
our
does.
society functions. Yeah.
Well,
So
there are more identifiable kind of recent, examples of how feminism actually genuinely harms the cause of women's rights. Yeah. So,
I
yeah.
could see that. I mean,
Yeah.
if you look over the last 30, 40 years, what have they done to help?
Yeah. Well, we thought the Equality Act was interesting, but that's led to another one of my kind of. I always like writing short articles because I've got a really short. I've got ADHD, so I
Yeah.
kind of like I have an empathy with people who just don't want to like read really long, multiple
Sure.
kind of premise long essays and stuff like that. So I try to put things
Mhm.
down. But about oh, I forgot again. I've forgotten what I was going to
No,
say.
it was
Uh,
no. What is feminism? The equality, third movement, or some? I said
yeah,
feminism in the
it's
last.
one of my short essays about just how the feminists and their inability to just even they were just so focused on revenge and changing a system that was making it different. They didn't actually look at what the unintended consequences of what they would be. So it's kind of like, I think it's called the cure for feminism is not feminism. It's on my
Yes, I
Substack.
read. Yeah. And
And
then.
just because I went to the British Library and I looked at the spare rib radical feminist kind of archives, and it
Mhm.
just documents it there about how they wanted this airy fairy, non-hierarchical, and then arrangement, and they let in some American black feminists or what they called at the time, what they called it at the time. I can't remember what they called it at the time, but it's in the essay anyway, and I've got all the links in there.
Yeah.
And suddenly it became really hierarchical, and it was kind of because it was like the black feminists were like, no, we're the ones in charge, and suddenly
Well,
radical feminism, the kind of the name of feminism itself got kind of co-opted as a kind of vector to get into because it sounds like a good thing. It
right.
sounds like a humanitarian thing, but it's never been a humanitarian thing. But
It's been a
because
power thing.
absolutely always been a power
Power and
thing,
control.
always been
Which
a
is
power thing, always been a power thing.
right, and it's kind of the human nature of it. If you're going to try to divorce yourself from our psychology, that evolved over what 100, I mean, actually millions of years, and
Well, millions of
specifically
years,
the
because
yeah,
we inherit the architecture from pre-hominid ancestors.
right.
Yeah, yeah.
So you're going to try to divorce yourself from that and assume that you could make something better culturally. It seems like what you're doing there is you're denying human nature, and it's going to come back to bite you, because every time unintended consequences, like you mentioned before, they're always there and they always happen, and we're in the process of dealing with the unintended consequences of that right now.
Yeah,
Well,
I don't particularly think we're as in a bad state as what we might think. I think we're in a precursor position, and I think things might calm down. But then I think things are really going to get fucked up. But
well,
Yeah.
that's what my
yeah,
next question would be: is how and when does feminism find a stopping point? Is there a
well,
stopping point? I mean,
look, when feminism and all kind of social constructionism, Marxism, tell us that they're massively against biological determination and all this and eugenics.
Mhm.
But with the kind of AI thing coming up, with the kind of the promises of what that can do politically, they are going to completely flip on that. They are it's going to happen with the trans thing. people think we're very close to kind of having artificial wombs. We're not. Because the human endometrium is very vastly more complex than a sheep's or a mouse. But
what happens? What happens?
Sorry.
If we have those,
once they get what they want, and they think they can erase sex and make women, as men, then they're going to be subject to male intersexual competition, and the level of brutality there is not going to be anything they're prepared for.
Right. That's a good point.
I agree.
Yeah. Hopefully there's an off-ramp before we get to that point. But I think you're right. We're not as close to artificial wombs as we think, because what happens... So, like, if you grow a sheep in an artificial womb, you don't really know if you're making that sheep a sociopath sheep, because you can't test that, right? But what if you're making sociopath babies, right? You would take a whole generation before you find out.
All of the artificial...
The dogs just let themselves in.
All of the artificial they're not, then it's nothing. They're basically just biological, what do you call them? Where you put premature babies, that kind of thing. There's actually no technology. The human endometrium is massively complex, and we do not understand it. It's as much a mystery to us as is consciousness. There are only less than a handful of species on Earth that have an endometrium, and humans are one of them. People think that periods mean that you have an endometrium. You don't. Things like dogs don't have an endometrium. They have bleedings and stuff like that, but they don't have an endometrium. The endometrium and the placental kind of environment is literally a frontier. It's as much a frontier as is the study of consciousness. We are nowhere near artificial wombs where you can, like in the Matrix, start.
That's got to be really hard to study too. I would imagine.
Well, yeah. And one thing I'd like to bring up, since we're sort of on this topic, is male to female conversion. So bottom surgery. Even if they could implant, a way for,
you can.
An artificial womb. But
you can,
the problem is
ectopic women have ectopic. I can't say it. Ectopic pregnancies, which are embryos implanted in the fallopian tube, but it's not in the womb. It's not and that will kill her, right? And there are really kind of subtle things. You could probably put something. I mean, theoretically, into just that kind of cavity, the abdominal cavity, and maybe it might implant. It'd be like, that old film Manitou, or where just this kind of thing grows and grows and grows, because genetically, there are things that are going on genetically between the male genes and the female genes that are promoting growth, and the female genes are kind of saying, no, you'll kill me if you get that big, so I have to kind of stop you. And you just put a human embryo in something like that, it will just grow to grotesque probably sizes and kill the host and kill itself in
right. And then you have the epigenetics too, and you have the way that the mother's, like you were saying, the way the mother's health during the process, and the way all of that interacts with the genes and the development of the child. Like the artificial womb idea scares the hell out of me.
But I mean,
sorry,
epigenetics will affect the male genetic, code or whatever is passing on there. But I mean, it's in no way kind of Lamarckian. You're not going to get. I think people. That's something I don't really know. I'm not a geneticist, so I know kind of like a bit thing about. But
sure,
epigenetics,
I was just reading this.
Marking, so.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's just interesting to see where it goes. But I think you're right. I think it's a lot further away than anybody thinks, and I think that's good.
But
I don't think
it's telling about what people who think it's just around the corner would do with it.
Yeah.
So, it's like what Napoleon said, never interrupt an enemy when they're making a mistake,
Yeah.
Give them more bread.
As long as they're not driving, as long as you're not in the car with them, right? As long as you're not in the car when you're the enemy and they're driving you off a cliff, that's the worry, right?
Yeah.
Do you have anything else? Or?
No, one thing I wanted to circle back to is intersexual competition. Now, and you said that we have these massive stadiums dedicated to male intersexual competition. Now, the question is, where do you think the Coliseum would fall in that? Do you think that was a way to call the Roman population towards violence, or some kind of hierarchical who's the better man by watching it, or do you think that was just
entertainment to pacify the masses, or both?
Or both, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I know there are some critics of the kind of what you call the yeah, I can't. Sorry, it's gone. But I don't know. You mean just the kind of the gladiators and
that kind
stuff
of
like that?
or you can even just say the Olympics. I mean, the Olympics were there to show which country's men were the strongest or the best at throwing javelins or discus.
A male version of beauty contests.
Yeah.
Right. It gives a focus to all the testosterone, right? It's like if you got all this testosterone, and if you can shape it and use it and you don't have to send those guys to war, that's probably better most of the time.
Oh yeah, and because bare branches, you get, and bare branches have a chance to lead it. What we're missing today, I think, in all the kind of incel thing is like incels are told, at 17, you should be able to go online and date, the woman of your dreams. Whereas in the past, it's like, no, you have to go through rites of passage. You have to become a man, and you have to prove that you are a man, and you have to do that. And women did that. The rite of passage for women was childbirth.
Yeah.
And as much as women are still like that, we still have to go through childbirth. It's a bit safer, but again, the biggest mortality in childbirth is now and then is the child. When it goes wrong, there are that kind of thing. So yeah, childbirth is safer now, but so is male competition because of sport, because we don't have to fight.
Hopefully. Yeah. Because the last time we all fought was so bad that we really, really don't want that to happen again.
I don't know. All right. The Red Pill might bring that back. Fighting to the death.
Yeah. All right, Paula, thank you. I'm sorry, what'd you say?
Measuring beards.
Yeah. That would be a lot safer. You're going to lose.
I can't say anything.
He's got a mustache.
Yeah, he does have a nice mustache.
Thank you.
Actually, baldness is a sign of high testosterone.
I've read that.
And I've known George for 20 years. He can attest to the levels of my testosterone.
I think it's calmed down a bit. Do you know, does having daughters make your testosterone lower? Or does it affect that?
Being a good father makes your testosterone lower, but not to clinically, pathological levels, no.
I just wondered because he's got one daughter, I've got three, and I just wonder if it I know I'm
oh my god.
And my mom and my wife, so there's 5 women in my house. I try to fish.
It's gonna be
that's what I worry about.
You need to start cage
I like my life. So far it's going well. I like my life. It's no big deal.
But one thing I want to ask you about, Paula, before we jump off here, one topic I wanted to breach is what I've noticed with, and this is way off topic, but what I've personally noticed with wokeism is it seems like a lot of people that are really following those guidelines or religiously following those guidelines don't have children, typically, or doesn't matter if they're single or dating or married, but they typically are older and don't have children, once you get out of the younger group that are single. But like I've noticed a lot of people in their 40s and 50s with no children. The only people they've ever had to take care of are themselves. And I've just really noticed that with that demographic, that wokeism has really taken hold. Do you see any correlation? I'm sorry?
Adolescents.
Oh, that's a good way to think about it. They haven't went through that rite of passage.
Yeah.
They haven't had, and so they're still stuck in this adolescence where it's the government should take care of me. Nobody should. I should feel safe.
Yeah.
Yeah. I get that. That's a lot of it.
They've
Yeah.
had to look after someone else. They've never had to put themselves before their own ego.
Yeah, they're very selfish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I was reading something about Kirk. Was it I was reading about something about existentialists today. About is it Kierkegaard or Camus? And one of them kind of talks about. I'm trying to think. Sorry, it's going to go again. I really have it like my mind is. I've got so many kind of ideas around it all the time, and if I don't catch it, it just goes by. But it might come back, depending on how much time we've got. It might come back. It was just about that kind of just that adolescent kind of stage of just that you not without taking responsibility and always thinking that there's a safety net for you. You know, like I'm someone who grew up without any kind of safety net whatsoever, and it's a terrifying thing, and I have palpable scars, from that's still open again, these days, but they're like kind of like people kind of, and I'm not Ayn Randian kind of, to any kind of degree either, but, and at the same time, you certainly need, as humans, we need help. We need to know how to ask for help. But at the same time, all of this, we live in a kind of culture of really shallow, false sentiment where everybody, even people, who, and it puts the people who, people who actually do need help, just right back at the bottom underneath all of these, strivers just for attention. And so
sorry, we moved up here. I got to plug in the laptop. But I get what you're saying there, Paula. Like all these fake victims, really distract away from the people who have really went through things.
Yeah, it is. Just like kind of, I'm somebody. I've got a medical diagnosis of autism that I got when I was like 40, but at the same time my son did when he was 10. And but autism kind of it's got a movement behind it called Actually Autistic, and it's kind of really if you look at the hashtag Actually Autistic on Twitter, it's kind of full of just, and it's part of what they call the neurodiversity or neuro. It's all kind of based within something called Steve Silverman's kind of neurotribes. That's one of the main kind of, and it's Marxist. It kind of is pushing the Marxist, the social model of disability. So it's kind of like anti any kind of biological or genetic research, because then it kind of cries eugenics. Everybody wants to kill us. But because it's kind of neurodiverse, it's a neurodiversity kind of thing. Anybody with any kind of neurodiverse, including pedophiles, including psychopaths, including sociopaths, anybody can can have this hashtag neurodiversity. And you want to keep psychopaths and sociopaths miles away from actually autistic people. Because,
they're really the easiest victims.
Like this trend has got them all together. And so this kind of movement is actually driven by psychopaths and sociopaths. And they, you have complete kind of proof, empirical proof there of just like how stupid it is.
Oh, this is a fascinating topic to me, and I would love to talk to you about this more, but I don't have the right computer charger down there, and my laptop is about to die. So
Okay.
before we actually lose the connection, I want to say thanks for coming on, and
Okay.
Be happy to have you again.
Yeah, and I will. I'll make something work out of all this video with the drops and everything.
It's been cool. I like talking. Yeah, it's cool.
Oh yeah, it was a pleasure. And honestly, I love talking the culture war stuff. So we could do that again sometime too. That would be great.
I don't often get
thanks again.
Opportunity to kind of voice these things out loud. You know, when you're a writer, you're just doing it so it's really good to actually do that. Yeah.
Great. Well, we'll do it again then. Okay.
Definitely.